So on the day we're flying to Beijing, Russian forces move into the Ukraine. Got to bed, determined to sleep, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. And people don't ring you at 2 o'clock in the morning with good news. Mentally, it's really difficult because someone you know has shot someone. But then you've got to put that to one side and do what is best for your organisation. It was scary because you were part of the biggest news story on planet Earth. The Paralympic movement was in danger of having the games to be cancelled for the first time in history.
I knew my mother was really upset. But then they encouraged me to do it. They're like, do it. It's the right thing for you. So, saying goodbye to your parents, your family members, it was really difficult. I'm thinking, God, I'm going to go there. I don't know where I'm going to live. I told you I'd do this.
And then this report comes out exposing the doping practices of Russian athletes, the biggest doping scandal in world sport.
Suddenly they've got a son.
Who's not there?
Tom.
Yeah.
Man, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
You've been
Exhausted,
through a
innit?
lot.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you do have a positive attitude though, towards everything.
You got it though, mate. That comes from the athletes. Hello, I'm Craig Spence, and this is how I became the IPC Chief Brand and Communications Officer.
Up in the north in Leeds, this guest's story begins. Learning life lessons from rugby of when you lose and when you win. His experiences in school taught him to speak up for diversity, seeing this as something we should take on together and not just on personally. Now the Chief of Brand and Comms at an organisation that represents 1.3 billion, providing people the stage to win medals, and by gosh, they are winning them. Every 4 years, you might see him in a different city. I introduce Craig Spence, the Chief Brand and Communications Officer of the International Paralympic Committee.
What a start. What a start. Welcome. It's great to be here.
Yeah. And this is your life, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
When does the Red Book come out, or is that later?
That's later. We'll do that later. And that's it. How did you become Chief Brand and Communications Officer of the International Paralympics Committee? As Ash said, organisation that impacts a lot of people around the world, and that's what the story we want to tell today.
Brilliant.
So let's give a bit of context.
Yep.
Paralympics is the third biggest sporting event on the planet.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we run in parallel with the Olympic Games in the same host city since 1988. And then, in terms of TV audiences, we are the world's third biggest. Not in terms of TV audiences, in terms of ticket sales, we're the world's third biggest sporting event. So only the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup sell more tickets than us. So
amazing.
And we've been on an exponential growth curve now for 12 years since I joined. Not because of me, but you know what I mean. London 2012 was a huge catalyst for us, and we've kicked on since there. And the impact that we have is just growing each edition.
I think what's interesting there, a lot of people might not know, is there is a great partnership between the International Olympic Committee and the Paralympic Committee, but they are separate organisations and have an agreement, but that wasn't always the case. It was only, when did you first kind of get together? Yeah,
well, the IPC is a young organisation. We were born in 1989 effectively, whereas obviously the International Olympic Committee, they're over 100 years old, so we're still fairly fresh. We're fairly new, but the games came together in 1988 in Seoul, having previously been together from 1960 in Rome, and then we went our separate directions. And
am I right in saying that originally it was just wheelchairs?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the amazing story of the Paralympic movement. It came out of the Second World War. I mean, the founder of the Paralympic movement was a Jewish doctor who fled Nazi Germany, came to UK as a refugee, and he worked at a rehabilitation hospital at Stoke Mandeville in Aylesbury. And he had this amazing vision where he said, look, let's rehabilitate injured war veterans with spinal cord injuries through sport. Because previously, if you had a spinal cord injury during the Second World War, you just pumped full of morphine and left to die. And this guy had this vision and said, look, let's rehabilitate people through sport. In 1948, on the same day as the opening of the Olympic Games in London, he organised the first Stoke Mandeville Games with some injured war veterans who did archery. And then from there, this movement has grown, and like, yeah, we've gone from humble beginnings in 1948, and now we're the world's third biggest sport event. And I think we are the planet's most transformational sport event, and I don't think anyone touches us for that. And it's really unique what we've got.
So that's the history of the Paralympics. Now the history of Craig Spence. Set the scene for us. What was childhood like for you growing up in Leeds?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm 43 years old, so I was born in 1979. I'm one of two sons to my parents, Christine and David. I'm the younger brother. My brother's 3 years older than me. Born in Leeds. Born and bred in Leeds. We had very humble beginnings. My dad at the time was a mechanic. My mum worked in a doctor's surgery. We lived on a council estate in Leeds. And we went to the local school. Interestingly, my little village that I live in is called Robin Hood. So I went to Robin Hood Primary School.
How cool.
Which is great. Loads of people think that must be in Nottingham, but it's actually in Leeds. Secondary school was a school called Redillion School. Great experience. I played rugby as a kid. That taught me so many skills in terms of leadership and things like that, teamwork and life skills. I was born though with a really dodgy stomach. I up until 8 years old, I had like really, really difficult stomach aches that we just couldn't get to the bottom of until.
And you were told that, you're being a hypochondriac.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just trying to get, take time off school. That was what they were saying to you.
Yeah, we had every single test under the sun where we went to a different specialist each week, and they just couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I'll always remember one doctor saying to my mother, "I think your son's a hypochondriac to get out of school."
And what are you thinking?
I was thinking, you need to be feeling the pain that I had, because this pain would just come and go. You couldn't predict when it would come. It wasn't driven by food.
What was it like? What did it feel like?
It was like a knot in your stomach. Would come and go, and
this is from as long as you remember.
Yeah, from birth. And it was bizarre. You like potting loads of diets. Like at kids, you got the bottle of milk. Well, no, he might be dairy intolerant, so you don't have the milk. And then he might need more milk. And it was just crazy. No one could get to the bottom of it. And then 2 weeks after this doctor had said, your son's a hypochondriac, I was in agony one morning, 3:00 in the morning, woke my parents up, and I'm like, I couldn't speak. I was rushed to hospital, and later that day, a surgeon just cut me straight down the middle and said, let's just take a look, see what we've got here. Wow. And the knotting stomach I'd felt in my stomach actually was scar tissue, which was strangling my stomach and bowel every now and again.
Wow.
And
that you had to deal with that for 8 years.
8 years, yeah. So that was, and had the doctor not cut me open that day and found it, then I'd have probably died that day.
Wow.
So it was an interesting childhood. That
was it difficult fitting in with the kids, and always seeming like you having to do different things?
No, it was fine. I mean, I still lived, it was like I lived a normal life. I mean, you probably get 1 or 2 stomach aches a day, and you just like have to go out of the class. You go to your teacher, I'm sorry, but I'm in pain here, and like. School at that time, there was nowhere. So I remember, like the old wooden benches that you used to like have in the school hall. You'd have to go lie on one of them, and it was like that was where.
Nice and comfy.
Yeah, and I'd just have to curl into a ball for like 30 minutes, and the curling up used to get rid of the pain.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, then the surgery. I mean, they cleared it up, and I had it was a bit of a mess. Obviously, waking up. I remember waking up and. The gown
on
was
the
just,
surgery.
I know after the surgery in the hospital when I'd come round, and my mum was in the bed next to me on like a camp bed that the hospital had provided, and I looked down at myself, and the gown was just red. I've never seen so much blood and iodine in my life, and it was like, what the hell's going on here?
What was your last memory before that?
I remember being taken to surgery, and the anaesthetist going, "You'll feel a lot better soon." And I remember seeing the size of the needle. I was like, bloody hell, is that going in my hand? And then and that was it. And then I was out, and then I remember coming to, my mum like being really emotional. And then I remember it was so annoying. The first day I was like out of surgery, the school, obviously the hospital had like the school, because they wanted to keep educating you. And I'd like just had this massive surgery, and this woman turned up and demanded that I do some maths.
No.
The worst thing ever.
Give me a
And I'm like, I really don't want to do any addition right now. And so both my parents advised her that it was best for her to depart. And it was a remarkable thing. But after that, I've had no issues really.
Wow. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that.
So yeah, and that got me back. Then I could get back into playing rugby.
So you were at school. You were very, very well. You're tall now. You were tall back then. You were captain of the rugby team, right?
Yep.
So those are influential figures at the school. And tell us, you had, which obviously you didn't know one day you'd be working for the Paralympic Committee, but there was someone in your class with a visual disability.
Yeah, we had a guy, Malcolm, in my form at school, a wheelchair user. He had a degenerative muscle wasting condition, and yeah, I've been a tall lad ever since I went to secondary school, and like you say, I played rugby to a high level, so you'd expect, and I stuck up for him. It was like, I like at the end of the day, he was an individual.
What would you see then? Why did you have to stick up with him?
I couldn't understand why, like, people would like not talk to him because he was in a wheelchair, and you're like, hang on a minute, his legs aren't particularly good in working, but he still is from the waist up, everything works, and he can speak sense. And he was a really nice lad, and obviously when you get to know people, it's the old saying, don't judge a book by a cover, and you got to know him, and he was a really nice lad. So then when it came to school trips, then it was great because I didn't go in with the minibus, I'd go in the car with him, and we'd have conversations, and it was
nice.
Yeah, it was nice, and that's sort of like, I didn't realise it until a few years ago, but probably that was my first experience of disability.
Why do you think you behave that way? Because the normal thing that, let's say, would be if you're popular, captain, tall, is not to spend time around other people than maybe a small crew.
I think it's the way my parents brought me up. I really do. I think they really brought us up to respect anyone we came along, regardless of who they were. And
what do you think it's like for someone who has to go through school with a condition like that, from what you saw?
I couldn't imagine it, to be honest. I mean, I think it's probably better today. I think I look at my niece and nephew, and they're far more open-minded today than I was as a kid. There's so much progress that's been made, but we're only scratching the surface on what really needs to happen.
From your perspective, how could the integration be better?
I just think we've got to get to a point where you look at society. We have made so much progress in terms of inclusion in the last, say, 20 years. I mean, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of sexual orientation. Real great progress, especially in this country, in Great Britain. We've still got a long way to go. But then disability is completely forgotten about. And disability intersects everything. But people look at the silos of inclusion, and actually we've got to go so far to really improve that and consider, look, there's 1.2 billion persons on this planet with a disability. That's 15% of society. So every 1 in 7 person has a disability. Now, not everyone discloses their disability because they want to hide it. And and those persons with disabilities are discriminated against at all levels of society. I mean, we've got athletes who, there's a great story of an athlete called Sophie Christiansen, who's a British Paralympian, first class master's degree in mathematics, would always apply for a job, and she's got quite severe cerebral palsy. She'd go for the interview, and they'd see a person with a disability, would they never give her the job, even though on paper she would definitely get the job. And they were discriminating because it was a disability. And sport has been this great tool for changing attitudes towards disability. And after London 2012, where she'd won several gold medals in equestrian, she got a job straight away. So we've got to get better at representing the 15% in society, because they can contribute. And when you bring people of diversity, is a real strength. When you bring people with different experiences together, different nations, different ages, different abilities, the world is a much better place. It's far more creative, and you can really flourish. So the more inclusive we can be in society, the better society will be.
Indeed. So let's go to the next stage in your life. You go off to uni.
Yep.
University of Central Lancashire.
Hurrah.
We went to the same university.
Amazing.
Look at that.
The joyous Preston.
That's right. Oh, it's a wonderful city if anybody wants to visit. You get there.
Yeah.
Your parents drop you off.
Yeah.
As you said, you came from humble beginnings on an estate in Leeds. What do you find out later in life about your parents after that?
Yeah, I mean, my parents, they'll probably punch me in the face for saying this, is at the time I was doing my first year of university at University of Central Lancashire, my brother was also at university. And funding two boys through university was a real stretch for my parents, and they sacrificed a lot to get us through there. And they always tell me now that, like, when they dropped me off, they left, and then for a week they pretty much had to eat beans on toast because they'd paid for my accommodation for the first semester and helped with my brother. And it was like, they don't tell you that at the time. It's like, go to university, live your dream, and then only later do you find out the sacrifices that they made so that you could really fulfill your potential. And that's something that blows me away to this day, and I'm super grateful for it. And then, so then they gave me the opportunity to go to uni and study for 3 years.
How does that make you feel now, knowing what sacrifice they made?
If you have goals and ambitions within your personal life, career, or business, and would like to overcome the challenges that you face, inspire people, and get to your goals faster, then a coach might be the right solution for you. Go to weunify.co.uk/coach. Now back to the show.
I think it's stunning. I think I'd love to do the same for my kids one day. I really would. It's like, I just think the fact that they sacrificed a lot for both of us to really develop and pursue our dreams is testament to the great people they are. My parents, I learned so much from. Like, not only did they do that, but then my dad, when I was born, was a mechanic. Then I remember when I was like, I think I was maybe 11 or something, he got made redundant. And
It's tough.
that was a real shock. And he then went to another place as a mechanic, and then he got an opportunity to go and get an office job. And my dad was gone. So my dad was used to be coming home from work covered from head to toe in oil and smelling of diesel. And then suddenly he's wearing trousers, a shirt, and he's bought a briefcase. Yeah. And it was just a remarkable turnaround. And he then really progressed his career. He went to night school, and like, by the time he retired, he was like the sales and marketing director of a company.
Wow.
On the board, and it just showed that if you really push yourself, you can be anything you want to be. And same with my mum. It's like, she's always pushed all of us to really fulfill our potential, and that's had a real impact, I think, on how me and my brother have got to in life, really. And at uni, I mean, one thing I was really keen on at uni was, and I remember a tutor telling me early doors, was like, look, you've got to build your experience up. So every holidays, I'd go work for a PR agency in Leeds, give up my time free of charge, and then build up a portfolio of work so that when I did graduate, I was able to show a portfolio and say, look, I've got some experience. I'm not because all the job adverts said you needed like 2 years experience. And I'm like, how on earth do you get 2 years experience when you're still at university? Yeah. So by building up that experience during my holidays, it ensured I managed to do that.
So true, so important.
So you finish university now. Where do you get your first job?
So my first job was a tiny little PR agency in Derby called Paskett PR, family-run organisation, 6 people, and my first clients were Home Pride Flour, Kerrygold butter, and lawnmowers, as well as gardening products, stuff I had no knowledge of. And I was there for 9 months. A great little agency. I mean, we had one computer that had email. So you think today it was like you had one computer of all these workstations, and if you want to send an email, you'd have to go down and use the shared computer. That makes me sound really old now, doesn't it? But it's amazing how far technology's come.
Yeah.
And then within 9 months, there was an opportunity to go to Yorkshire Water, and I applied for the job, took it, and that was one of the best moves of my career. And I always remember the guy in Derby was really upset, and I remember handing my notice, and he went, "You'll never work as a place as good as here. Your career is not going to progress now because you've left me." Then I went to Yorkshire Water, and my career started to skyrocket. I joined an amazing team. Yorkshire Water had just come through, obviously, the drought in the late 90s, and got a real kick in from a communications point of view. And
so everybody's hating Yorkshire Water right now because they can't get the water.
I think the hate had gone. It was just like a lull, but everyone always remembered the drought. And then they wanted to like be more proactive in their communication. So they brought me in as like, obviously, a young kid. And it was just, I joined such a talented team. And this is where my learning experience really began. I mean, I always say now, you learn so much from your colleagues, whether they're your leaders or people you work with. And we had an amazing director of communications called Richard Emmett, who I idolized when I worked at Yorkshire Water, and he'll laugh now that I say that. And then I had a corporate affairs manager, Richard Sears, and David Simister, who was our media relations manager. That trio taught me so much. I learned so much. I was a creative real creative, enthusiastic guy. David was super creative. Richard was a good foil to that. Very sensible, very corporate, and Richard Emmett was just so strategic in his thinking. First thing I wanted to do was and it's difficult because when you go to Yorkshire Water, you're promoting tap water and sewage treatment.
Classy.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you do
Premium
that? But so we did a simple thing on tap water. We did I came up with an idea called tap versus cap. Can you taste the difference between beautiful Yorkshire water and bottled water? So we had a supermarket brand and Evian. We then toured shopping centres in Yorkshire, and we did blind taste tests in shopping centres, and we found that I think it was 6 out of 10 people couldn't taste the difference between bottled water and tap water. And then it turned into a whole advertising campaign across Yorkshire trying to encourage people not to scrap bottled water. And it wasn't at that point about environment or anything like that. It was about tap water. It's nice and cheap. It's the best value drink. So tap versus cap was the first real proactive campaign that we did. And I came up with it as the young kid in the team, and getting that signed off and the support of the bosses was really difficult, because here's an organisation that previously had taken a flogging. And I remember going to a meeting as this, I think I was 22 at the time, presented Tap v Cap, and they said, "Oh, our dead body, you can do this." And I was devastated. And then we refined the idea. We went back and we got it signed off, and then we delivered it. And yeah, it won quite a few awards, and that gave us real encouragement to go and progress other things. So we did the ultimate dirty weekend that we did for Valentine's Day with a local radio station, where you spent a weekend in a 5-star hotel in Leeds. You got driven around in a Rolls Royce, but on the Saturday you would go to a sewage treatment works and effectively shovel shit.
What a contrast!
And it was just great, but it was great. And then the idea was people would learn about sewage treatment and
step out of the Rolls Royce
and it was hilarious.
Into a pile of
yeah. And then the last thing I did when I was at Yorkshire Water which was brilliant, is we had a campaign which was we wanted to show that tap water was the best value for money drink there is out there. And at the time, there was always like, you've got to drink this, it helps you slim, or this is the best energy drink. And on April Fool's Day, working with GMTV, Kate Garraway it was at the time, we launched Diet Tap Water on GMTV. And the idea was that we'd fit a third tap to a new housing estate in Bradford, and I was the scientist supposedly who invented it. And the idea was we came up with this mythical formula that the tap water went through a third treatment process where we gave it a positive charge. And then when you drank it, it attracted the negative fat cells in your body. And then when you went to the toilet, you effectively let go of the fat in your body. And the serious message behind it was, this is the best health drink you can get, and it costs less than a penny a litre. So we did it with GMTV. And then it was hilarious. We had our internal comms manager, who was a guy who'd benefited from it and lost 10 stones just from drinking tap water. We had the managing director's personal assistant, Vicky. She was Andrew's mythical wife for this, and she was talking about it, and it's just brilliant. And we had like 10,000 people call the call centre, wanting to know, well, how do I get this product? And then we said, look, thank you for calling Yorkshire Water today, the 1st of April. There's no such thing as Diet Tap Water, but if you're looking for the world's #1 best value for money health drink, try Yorkshire Water Tap Water.
Genius.
And it was just so it had it cost us 60 quid to do the campaign.
Wow.
And that was we worked with a housing developer. We saw a housing estate near work that was being developed, and we rang them up, their comms team, and said, look, we've got this idea. Can you give us your show home for the day? We just need to fit a third tap to the sink. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. So it cost us 60 quid, and it
That's
won
some good ROI.
Yeah, and it won best low budget campaign. And the Daily Mail, Channel 4 News at the time fell for it. Can we get you on the show tonight? Can we get you down to London? We want to really talk about this product. And we were like, it's an April Fool, don't we? And, oh my word! So yeah, it worked a treat. It worked a treat, and then
so you're flying, you're doing very well.
Yeah.
But you have a challenge there in that you're still young and still on a starting salary almost, right?
Yeah, I mean, I started off Yorkshire on 14,000 a year, and I progressed over the 3 years. I got to 17,500. And for me, we were a team winning multiple awards. We'd won like Team of the Year and things like that. I'd got a few awards as a young communicator, and I really wanted to develop. And I was like, I want to be paid more, and I want to get to a manager level. And they said, and they were very honest with me, like, look, organizational structure is, until someone leaves, we can't just, you're going to have to wait until someone leaves. And Yorkshire Water is a place for some people where they go and work for 20, 30 years.
So this could be a while before that.
Could be a
position
while.
opens
So I was
up.
like, well, in that case, pay me more. I love this organisation. I don't want to leave. And they said, no, that you're at the top of the band and we can't change the pay structure. And I was like, really banging my head against a brick wall. And then I remember looking online, and this is a bit of, like I said earlier, about when you've done a degree, you've got a little bit of arrogance to you to start with. And I remember going online on the internal job system, and I could see that a sewage tanker driver was earning £24,000 a year for driving sewage around Yorkshire. So I applied for that job. I was like,
that was going to be your pay rise.
Yeah. And like, I remember getting like, my boss is going, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I've done a degree. We've won multiple awards as a team. I want to progress, and you won't pay me more, and I can earn £7,000 a year more driving shit around Yorkshire. So I'm interested. And then
What did they say?
They just laughed and were like, "This is just found it funny." But then they gave me the best career advice I think I probably ever had, and I've used this advice so much with my team. They said, "Look, Craig, you can progress as much as you want in life here because we've seen what you've done to our team and helped our team. If you want to get further in your career, you need to leave. Go
So
pursue."
they told you to leave the company. Your
Go
boss.
pursue. If you want to progress your career, you're going to be better to leave and pursue opportunities elsewhere, and that'll help you get to where you need to be. So,
Which is quite rare for a boss
yeah,
to say that,
very,
right?
very
but it was
rare advice.
brilliant. It was really brilliant because they weren't looking out for the company as such. I mean, they were looking out for the company, but they were also looking out for you, and I loved that. And I've done that with multiple people who've worked for me now, saying, "Look, we've got you to a certain level. You need to go elsewhere to really get up the career ladder." So I left shortly after doing the diet tap water. I went to a PR agency in Leeds called Ptarmigan. I was devastated. I remember when I left, I cried on the day. I got home and I was like, oh, man, I'm never going to work for an organisation as good as that in my life. I was like, it's been tremendous for 3 years. And then I worked in an agency. And that's where I started to get involved a little bit in sport. So N-Power was sponsoring the England cricket team and test matches at the time. And we also had a sports division that I wasn't in, but then I was desperate to get into sport type of thing. And it was, again, a real good learning experience for me. That piece of advice, look to move because you've reached probably the level you can here. I've given that advice to 2 or 3 people who've worked for me since, especially at the IPC, and their careers have flourished. Eva Vertman, who was our media operations manager at the time when I joined the IPC, and she was really keen to develop, and we set a pathway for her to get to senior manager. And then effectively, the only way she could progress further in the organisation was if I left. And I'm like, I've no intentions of leaving Eva. And I said, look, if you want, look elsewhere, try finding. And so she went then to head up comms for German triathlon. And now she's head of communications for the German Olympic Committee.
How does it make you feel when you see her, thriving and shining?
Oh, chuffed a bit. Absolutely ecstatic. Absolutely ecstatic. And another colleague of ours who's just left, Hernan, an Argentinian guy who I recruited to the IPC in 2015. Lovely guy. He came as a raw talent. Again, progressed as far as he could. And he's just now gone to a marketing agency in Berlin looking after Adidas. So proud of him. So proud of him. And it's important that you develop the talent and don't see them as a threat because everyone wants to progress. And you're sometimes thinking, does this person want my job? And that's great. Develop them as much as they can because you'll eventually leave the organisation. You need a successor, or they can go and develop their careers elsewhere. And it's really important that you work. You don't see your colleagues as threats. You see them as opportunities, and you do the best for them as well as for your organisation.
I think that is really solid advice there, because being a leader, as you say, if you're cultivating talent as a leader, you're cultivating talent. You're cultivating their skills and abilities. And if there's no way you can do that, if you're then under threat of thinking, oh, they might take my job, or they might, there might be a power struggle here.
Totally.
Like, it doesn't work like on both hands.
And it's great. I mean, we've got another greatly talented team member, Natalia, in our team. She was my first recruit. She joined as a coordinator. She's now head of department. She came in super driven, and where she wanted to go. And all you've got to do is give them direction, give them feedback, give them learning opportunities. But if the drive from the person is there, they'll thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really important throughout.
Love it. So you make a big move in fast forward a little bit to 2010.
Yeah.
And this is the beginning of your career with the International Paralympic Committee.
Yeah.
But you have to move country.
Yeah.
You have to leave your friends.
Yeah.
Leave all your family, your network, and everything. How was that?
So after Ptarmigan, which was agency, I then went back in-house, did 3 years working for the Rugby Football League, based in Leeds. So rugby league was the sport I'd played at. So I did 3 years there. That was my inter-sport, you could say. And then from there, I joined the International Paralympic Committee in 2010.
How exciting.
It was really exciting. It was quite funny. I mean, I'd never heard of them. I knew of the Paralympics, but I didn't know who organised them or anything. Mm. And then a friend of mine, I'll always remember, Mark Dorey, who was at the time working for Leeds Metropolitan University, and he said, look, I think you'd love this. I think this is a real opportunity for you. And I was really thankful for Mark for pointing me in that direction. And he said, look, there's this job and I think you should go for it. So I applied for it, not knowing anything. And I did loads of research, found out about the Paralympics and stuff like that. And then I got invited for an interview. And it was one of those where I thought, I've got no chance here. I mean, this is an international sports organisation.
What was the role you were applying for?
It was communications manager at the time. Mm-hmm. And I applied for the job. And then I got an interview with the chief operating officer at the time, a guy called Georg Schlachtenberger. You couldn't get any more German name than that with Georg. German. And and it was great. I mean, I did tons of research. And the interview was really honest. It was like, what do you know about us? Was the first question.
And you said, not much.
And I was like, not much. I said, look, I can be really honest. I said, I can either give you the answer that I've been researching all week, and I've done tons of research, so I know loads, or I can say that up until this interview, I knew nothing about you. But that's where I can help you. I said, I think I can come in and really, really amplify what you're doing as a movement, and there's no communication strategy there. I'd love to come in and do a communication strategy. And then I met with Sir Philip, who was the president at the time, a guy from Bolton. Brilliant guy, straight
Bolton's
talker.
Close to Leeds, for those who don't know.
He's and Phil was brilliant. And then there was Xavi Gonzalez at the time, who was our chief executive. And with Sir Philip and Xavi, gave me this amazing opportunity. I mean, the IPC at the time was 30 people. Moving to Bonn was unbelievable. Like to sell your house. Say goodbye to your friends, say goodbye to your family, move to a country that I knew Germany, but to go to a place where you think, I don't know anyone in this city, and you've got to restart your life. And it was in the hardest move I've ever done.
What was hard about it?
Well, just saying goodbye to everyone. Like saying goodbye to your parents, your family members. It was really difficult. I'm thinking, God, I'm going to go there. I don't know where I'm going to live. Don't have any friends there. And it was just like a real move out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And it's the best thing I ever did.
Especially given all that your parents sacrificed. Yeah. That's a strong relationship.
Totally.
And you have to leave them, it might feel like leaving them alone.
Yeah, but they were again, and I knew my mother was really upset. But then they encouraged me to do it. They're like, do it. It's the right thing for you. So, can we break there so I can just have a bit of cry?
Yes, of course.
I told you I'd do this.
Well, look, that's what, this is a place where it's feel free to be open and show your emotions. Be real,
Always.
That's life. Tell us about the first 2 years. How was it the first couple of years?
So the first 2 years was getting to grips with the movement. So it was fairly quiet because this was like, I joined with 2 years to go until London 2012.
And there was the whole of the International Paralympic
Committee
was 30 people that had to organise the London Paralympics.
I mean, obviously there's an organising committee in the host city, so there was London 2012 organising committee, but the IPC was 30 people.
So what does that actually mean? So there's people on the ground in London.
So you've got an organising committee of thousands of people here, And then we oversee the work. So we work with the organising committee to check they're doing things how we do, and we agree on communications plans. We worked with Channel 4.
And is it a different organising committee each time? So
Yeah,
it'll be
yes.
the London one for London,
Absolutely.
Rio for Rio.
Yeah.
Got
So then we get to work on London. In comms, there was me and Eva. So comms was me and one other person. And you don't just work on one games at a time. So I remember the first week I was there, I flew to Moscow for a meeting with the Sochi 2014 Paralympic Winter Games organising committee. So, and then you were working 3 games ahead. So you were balancing London, Sochi, Rio. Before I joined the IPC, I'd only ever really been to Spain and Germany and France on family holidays. And then within a year of being at the IPC, I'd been to China, Russia. I did World Championships of Athletics in New Zealand. I'd been to Brazil.
Are you just loving this?
Yeah, and I'm
All
like
these new
thinking,
places?
this is just the most amazing thing. I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, it sounds glamorous traveling all around the world, but the IPC is a not-for-profit organisation, so we fly economy everywhere. So you would fly 13 hours to, say, Brazil, get to your hotel, shower, and go do a day of meetings, a couple of days of meetings, and you fly back.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds
No Sugarloaf
super
Mountain
glamorous.
or-
Yeah, I mean, you do.
You get some in
eventually,
that.
once you settled in, you start like booking long weekends onto the trip.
Nice.
I love challenger brands, and what I loved about the IPC was just the vision of the organisation was to make for a more inclusive world through parasport. And you're thinking, geez, I've always wanted to work in sport, but this is sport with a purpose. We can use sport as a tool and a vehicle to not just transform the lives of the athletes who are at the Paralympic Games, but 1.2 billion people. And then it was a blank canvas to really start building the strategy of the Paralympics. And the first thing we did was work with London 2012 to reposition Paralympic sport. So many people had previously seen Paralympic sport as just persons with disabilities doing sport, that anyone could turn up. Oh, you've got a disability and you can do a bit of sport. Hey, fancy the Paralympics. And when I got to speak to the athletes, I realised that these are high-performance athletes who train just as hard as Olympians. So for London, we said, look, let's work together with the organising committee, Channel 4 and the sponsors to really reposition Paralympic sport as high-performance sport. And that was a really great move.
Is this where the ad for Channel 4
Absolutely.
came in?
I remember we used to have weekly comms meetings and we said, look, let's really reposition Paralympic sport so the athletes look like Olympians, even though we've got to show the disabilities. We shouldn't hide away from it. We worked with all the sponsors to do the same. And then we said, let's make athletes the focal point, because previously the IPC's comms was all about being a governing body. No one cares about what a governing body says. Really, they care about the athletes. I mean, you look at the easiest example is Cristiano Ronaldo has how many hundreds of millions of Instagram followers? FIFA probably has 1 million. People engage with the athletes, not the governing bodies. So our comms then became about telling the stories of the remarkable athletes that we had all around the world. And obviously we had one very high profile athlete at the time, which was Oscar Pistorius. And I consciously said to the team, we should avoid doing comms with Oscar because he's big enough as it is. And if he was to be hit by a bus tomorrow and disappear, we've got no one else to go to. So we started to build this comms strategy around other athletes, including athletes who could rival Oscar Pistorius.
Yeah.
So I remember in Christchurch, we had this athlete called Jerome Singleton, a US athlete. Having chatted with him, I found out that he'd done an internship at NASA designing a spacecraft to go to Mars.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, I've just come from rugby, where some people didn't realise what the national anthem was that we sang before each game, to a guy who's doing an internship at NASA. And it was remarkable. And he was, and with Jerome, we worked out this strategy with Oscar in 2011. I said, look, Jerome, you nearly beat Oscar in 2008. And I realised that if we could get someone to beat Oscar Pistorius, comms-wise, it'd send out a very loud message to the world about how good high-performance sport was.
Yeah.
Because Oscar was obviously trying to get to the Olympics. So everyone saw him as the world's #1 Paralympian. And if we
Just
could
explain that. So he wanted to go from Paralympics to Olympics.
Yeah, so Oscar wanted to. I mean, Oscar at the time was a phenomenal athlete, and he wanted to go compete at the Olympic Games doing the 400 meters. That was his aspiration. And because of that, he was running a lot of able-bodied events. And people saw him as the world's number one Paralympian. But I was there thinking, if he's ever beaten in the Paralympics, or another athlete goes anywhere close to beating him, or we can make it competitive, that's going to send out a real loud message about how high performance sport and Paralympic sport. So in Christchurch, we worked out this strategy with Oscar and Jerome where we set up this rivalry. So Oscar was like, I'm really looking forward to racing. Jerome's a really good athlete, but I think I'm going to be faster. Jerome then came back the next day in the media saying, well, I'm gonna beat you.
This is all planned.
Yeah, and it was like we got some fighting talk going because sport is based on rivalry.
Yeah.
You engage people in sport through rivalry. You might not be a football fan, but you know that when Barcelona play Real Madrid, it's a massive, massive game. Look at boxing. Boxing is the ticket sales are driven on the boxers sledging each other. We couldn't do it in rugby as such because the players knew that if they said something against a rival player, they get their head smashed in the first 5 minutes. Whereas in athletics, what's the worst that could happen? So we did this rivalry, and Jerome came really close to beating Oscar, and it was just magical, and it gave us a real opportunity. And the athletes were just so up for more communications because they realised that we were onto something special, and then. Yeah, after 2 years, we had London 2012, and that's when the rocket just went, and we took lift off for the Paralympic movement.
Are you an agency or brand that would like to work with our production company, Unity and Motion? If so, contact us at unityandmotion.com. We produce commercials and social content for brands such as Chanel, Amazon, Reebok, Harrods, The Ritz, and many more. Now back to the show.
So tell us, before the 14th of February 2013, what was your relationship with Oscar? And tell us a bit about him. Who people don't know.
So Oscar was he was seen as the world's number one athlete. Lovely guy, lovely guy.
Full stop, not Paralympic athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I remember meeting him for the first time in New Zealand. Great guy. And he was like, "Yay, Craig, I've heard you joined the IPC. Good to see you." And then we had a really good relationship. We'd exchange WhatsApps, or at that time it was SMSs.
So how often would you be seeing him?
At events. So when he was competing in Paralympic sport events or World Championships, and maybe at the Paralympic Games, we met him. So in London 2012, obviously the build up to those games, he competed in the Olympics, then the Paralympics. And then, he was a great advocate of Paralympic sport. We didn't need to do too much with him because he had his own team round him building his profile. So our focus was more on people who could potentially beat him or other athletes because we've got to imagine that the Paralympics isn't just about blade runners, it's all the other athletes and all the other sports. So we built a strategy of ones to watch in every single sport because a lot of people who were coming to the Paralympics were like, I don't know where to begin. Who should I be watching? So we did athlete profiles of all the best athletes in the sports who were good media talkers, who the media could report on. And then we let Oscar with his team live by their own devices because they were doing enough comms as it was. So,
and how big was he?
He was huge. He was like wherever you went, people took notice of him. He was a rock star at the time. And he also inspired a lot of athletes to, I mean, you ask a generation of Paralympians around that time, why did you get into Paralympic sport? And they'll say Oscar Pistorius inspired me.
And what was your relationship with him?
It was good. We had a good working relationship. Like I say, we'd exchange messages. If he had concerns, he'd ring me or he'd message me. And it was a good relationship like I'd have with any other athlete.
So talk us through the 13th of February 2013. What were the events?
You're in Toronto.
I was in Toronto. We were on a site visit for the Pan American Games. I think the night of the 13th, I'd been out for some drinks with the Canadian Paralympic Committee, probably a few too many drinks. Got to bed, determined to sleep, and then 2:00 in the morning, the phone rang. And people don't ring you at 2:00 in the morning with good news. And it was and I'd missed the call. And then I saw a message from my brother just saying, "Oh boy, you're going to be busy today." And I'm like, what? And then I rang the journalist back and he said, "Look, there's reports in South Africa that Oscar Pistorius has shot dead his girlfriend." And I just remember freezing, thinking, "Bloody what?" And he said, "Yeah, he's mistaken her for an intruder in the house and he's shot her dead." And you're thinking, oh my God. It's the first time ever in my life someone I knew had been involved in something like that. And you just froze. And then I was thinking, my brother's right, this is going to be the hardest day of work ever. So then then we went into crisis mode, which was like, and it's 2:00 in the morning in Toronto. And then it was like, how do we get through this? So then I phoned our chief executive who was in Toronto with me.
Is that the first person you call?
Yeah. Rang him. I said, look, to the journalist, I'll come back to you. And by this time, every journalist in the world is ringing me. So it's
it's
difficult to make a call on your mobile phone when your phone doesn't stop ringing. So I used the hotel phone to ring our chief exec and said, look, Xavi, I'm sorry, it's 2:00 in the morning, but this has happened. And he was like, oh, shit. And then I phoned Sir Philip, our president, who was in Bolton, in Cheshire at the time. It was still early morning. I think it was like 7:00 UK time. He was in bed. And he said, no one rings me at 7:00 in the morning with good news. And I told him what had happened. And he was like, oh, blimey. And then we just said, look, I remember sitting down with the team and I just had a few discussions with people like on the phone. I said, look, we've got to be really careful here because a lot of people were going out with statements saying, oh, poor Oscar, mistaken his girlfriend for this. And I was like, we've got to be really careful here because if it transpires that it wasn't an accident and we've been shown lots of sympathy, then we're going to get hammered. So let's play the long game here. And I remember our statement was very generic about sympathy for the deceased and their family members.
What was your thinking behind that? Why did you say that?
But just, you never know. You never know. I mean, all you've got is someone's dead. Something tragic has happened. And you've got to be really, I always think in communications, it's a bit like a game of chess. It's so strategic. You've always got to think one step ahead. And that's what I was thinking was like, we've got to be really careful here. So we were super careful. We issued a statement. And then in crises, I always think that you shouldn't shy away. You've got to try fill airtime. So we pretty much did every interview that was requested of us. And interestingly, on that day in Toronto, we were due to do a media day where we'd set up 20 interviews with Canadian media to talk about the Pan American Games. And I remember the director of communications for the organising committee in Toronto ringing me going, do you want to cancel? I went, no, we'll do them all. And
that's a brave decision.
Yeah, and he was like, why? And I said, we'll talk about it. So we talked about how, and the reason why we did that is we realised, look, regardless of what's happened here, Oscar's clearly probably not going to be competing soon. And we needed to show that the Paralympic movement wasn't just about one person. So we filled the airtime. We said, look, our sympathies are with the deceased and the family of Reva Steenkamp. We filled all the airtime that we needed to, talking about how the Paralympic movement was more than one athlete. And it was the most unbelievable, surreal day. And I remember, I think at one point I had 122 missed calls on the phone, like umpteen voicemail messages. And it was scary because you were part of the biggest news story on planet Earth.
How was that for you personally?
It's difficult. Mentally, it's really difficult because someone you know has shot someone. But then you've got to put that to one side and do what is best for your organisation. So all the thoughts and emotions you've got to put to one side. By the time I got onto the plane to fly home, I'd been awake for 36 hours.
You must have been drained.
Yeah, and I remember embracing Xavi before, like we got changed just before we went to the thing. And I remember we just cried on each other. We got 30 seconds where we just embraced and cried. All the emotion came out. And then we got to the airport and we went to the airport lounge and we're like, at least we can maybe relax now because we've given all the interviews. And I remember the 10 o'clock news coming on in the evening in the lounge in the hotel, in the airport. And every TV had either me or our chief executive on TV talking about what had happened. And everyone just looked at us like that. And obviously then people wanted to talk about it. And we didn't. And then we didn't want to obviously talk about it. And I remember getting on the plane exhausted. And the plane had engine trouble on the runway. And I kept drifting off like this. And every time I drifted off, I started hallucinating. And a little pixie would run up the corridor of the plane and slap me around the face and wake me up. And this happened for like 45 minutes.
Really?
And there was no one sat next to me. And then there was a little old lady sat in the window. And I kept saying, have you seen that pixie? Did you see that? And she was really concerned.
I bet.
Really, really concerned. And she was like, what the hell am I sat next to here?
Why did that happen?
Just exhaustion.
Sleep
Just
deprivation.
complete exhaustion.
Had
Because
that ever happened before?
I'd not slept. No, I've never had it again. and it was like, and then I fell asleep. As soon as the plane took off, I slept, and it was a 7-hour flight back to Frankfurt, and I think for 5 hours I slept solid, and then I woke up, and the old lady next to me went, put her arm, reached over, and she went, "Are you okay, dear?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." I said, "What happened last night?" And she said, "You were hallucinating." And she said, "You claimed there was a pixie." And I told her, I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'd not slept for 36 hours. I explained what I'd been involved in. She went, "Oh, do you know what? When we took off, I asked to move because I thought you were either a drunk or a drug addict because you were making no sense. You were so incoherent."
Well, it makes sense for her, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I can imagine it. So I remember then landing in Frankfurt, and I switched my phone off, which I very rarely do, and I slept for 18 hours solid.
Wow.
And then the next day, I rang Sir Philip and I rang Xavi, and I said, "Look, we need to go on the offensive here because a lot of people are speculating that this could be the end of the growth of the Paralympic movement because the superstar athlete has been arrested." And I said, "We've got to go out and tell the world that the movement still exists, and the fact that Oscar, when he came to London 2012 Paralympics, he didn't win gold in the 100. He was beaten by Johnny Peacock. In the 200, he was beaten by Alan Oliveira, and he won the gold in the 400. So we've got to show the world that we are bigger than one athlete." And we went a little bit on the front foot, and we were talking about how the movement, we still felt that the movement could grow and that we would build towards Rio, and London had given this new generation of superstar athletes. And that's how we got through it. And then obviously every time the court case came up, we'd get the media coming to us. And one of the learning experiences that I remember getting hammered for an interview I did on the BBC with Nicky Campbell, where it's one of those things where they clip the sound bites. And I described Oscar Pistorius as an inspiration to many athletes. And I remember them saying, "But he's murdered someone, Craig. He's been found guilty of murdering someone." And I was like, "Yeah, but there's multiple athletes who have taken up Paralympic sport because of this man." Very rarely does someone uninspire you. So like there's those athletes who'd been inspired to take up Paralympic sport didn't suddenly decide they were going to give up Paralympic sport because of what had happened in South Africa. So that was and then I got hammered on social media. This is where the trolls came out. And I remember it was really upsetting for me personally. And I just I'm obsessed by social media. And for a weekend, I just didn't go on Twitter. And then my parents were seeing some of the abuse I was getting on social media. Like, this guy's got no heart. He's just described a murderer as an inspiration. And,
how does that feel?
Oh, hideous. Hideous. The trolls on social media. I mean, I've had it a few times, but it's just like, that was my first experience of it.
It must be so hard because it's so easy to say the wrong thing or
Yeah.
say the things that are going to...
Totally. And I wanted to correct myself on social media going, look, someone doesn't uninspire people. They might have a very different view of the person because of what's happened, but you don't uninspire people. These people are still doing sport. But then I just thought, you know what? When the trolls start, you're never going to win. At the start, the moment you start to interact with them, game over. So I just kept my head down for the weekend, stayed at my parents, chilled out. They were really great with me. And then it was just back to planning.
How did you plan for those interviews? How do you prepare for interviews where you know there's a lot of things I could say that are going to be wrong or bad or make the company or myself?
Yeah, I always think on crisis communications, you should always try fill the airtime if someone's giving you the opportunity if you've got something to say. Because if you don't go out and say it, all they'll do is go get a talking head from elsewhere who will fill that airtime with stuff that they will maybe throw back at your organization and be negative. And that was I've always been taught that in crisis communications is try have someone who can speak and give the company's views, because if not, there'll be someone who will say something negative instead about you. So just try that. So yeah, it was difficult, a really difficult time.
Moving forwards, you go to next Olympics is 2016 Rio. How was the preparation for that? Because things almost went bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean, Rio is the most beautiful city on planet Earth. I mean, the build up to Rio for the first few years was spectacular. Being able to go work in Rio, meetings during the day, beach morning and night was amazing. And then the organising committee, I mean, Brazil at the time was going through a financial crisis, and the organising committee was pretty much going bankrupt. And at one point, it looked like the Paralympics might not happen. And so here was a project we'd worked on for 6 or 7 years, and we were in danger of not having the games happening.
All that work, all the people,
and you've got to think, like,
jobs.
It's not just our work, but you've got athletes who have been training for 4 years for this pinnacle games, and suddenly it might get pulled from under their feet
But
because
why?
Yeah.
because the money wasn't coming in. There's been some financial mismanagement here and there, I think, and just everything was going wrong. The recession, ticket sales were abysmal. I mean, we were what, a month out from the games and they'd sold 150,000 tickets out of 2.5 million.
Oh,
Whoa.
wow.
And we're like, we've just come from London where we've sold out, and the Paralympic movement's going to go backwards. If you know, like, this could be a catastrophe for us. And we knew, and the government was unwilling to release some funding that had promised for the organising committee unless the organising committee had shown their financial records. And we just had this massive standoff. But the Paralympic movement was in danger of having the games to be cancelled for the first time in history. And it was just like,
How were you feeling?
oh, it was horrendous. I remember our chief executive at the time, Xavi, ringing me and going, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, woke me up. So again, you don't get pleasant calls at that time of the day. 4 o'clock in the morning, hi Craig, I think you need to do a communications plan for the cancellation of the Paralympics.
Oh,
Wow.
man.
And I'm like, all right, where do we go? How come? And he told me, and I was like, all right, no worries. And then he went, all right, get back to sleep now. And I'm like,
Can you
There's
go
no
back to
sleep
sleep?
after
there's
after
no
that?
sleep after that. And then,
So just to be clear, he's asking you to make a
Yeah,
how you
he
would
was like-
communicate.
yeah, he was
the
like,
Paralympics is off.
yeah, he said, I think he says, this is not looking good. I think you need to start working on the plan for the cancellation of the Paralympics.
Grey Matter's new business tip for today. Create a list of 25 dream clients. Get your whole team to contribute and discuss why you think these companies are right. Then, every 2 weeks, use insights and research to tailor your approach to one of them. Provide clarity and success stories of how you can help them. The quality of your approach will help you stand out. Grey Matters is a straight-talking business development consultancy that empowers agencies to position, market, and sell themselves for new business success.
At this point, did the athletes know that
They didn't know what was going on. We were very protective of this. And then what we did is, then I rang Sir Philip, who was our president at the time. Sir Philip's possibly one of the most positive people I've ever come across.
He sounds like a rock in this
He's
situation.
brilliant, absolute rock star. And I rang him and I was like, Phil, Xavi rang me last night. I think he maybe had a couple of red wines saying I need to plan for the Paralympics. He said, no, lad. No, he says, if we've only got €1, we will make the games work with €1. He said, we're going to do everything we can. We cannot fail. And that just gone from here, just lifted you up. And then, so I rang Xavi. I'm like, Phil says we're going to make it work. And he went, well, he's always an optimist. And so in the end, I did a bit of planning on it. And then one of the things we did was like, we then started to work with the British media who'd done such a brilliant job promoting London 2012. And they were like, we sort of like positioned to it then, like, do you know what? You did an amazing job in London 2012. And the legacy that you set might be, the Paralympic legacy of London could be destroyed with Rio because the games might get cancelled. So the British media started to really flare up the issues that were out there. Because at the time, we also had an issue where the organising committee should have paid the travel grants for teams to fly to Rio. And there was no money to pay for the travel grants. So the teams couldn't even fly to the games. So we then put out a few of the feelers into the media about what the issues were in terms of the finances, the travel grants. And then we did a press conference in Brazil talking about it being the most critical moment for the Paralympic movement. And we laid bare the issues for the first time publicly. Sir Philip did this press conference in Brazil and said, look, this is where we're at. And we need to get a fix. And then our vice president, Andrew, who's now our president, he's Brazilian. So he worked with the Brazilian government and Sir Philip, they got the money. Xavi was in Rio and he worked with the organising committee because although if we knew we could get money, we'd never got the amount we wanted. So we had to completely rescale the games with a month's notice. We said, look, we can scale a lot of things back, but the athlete experience should be untouched. The athletes have to have the experience of their lives when they come. And then with ticket sales, they were really poor. So we worked with a guy who's a good mentor, I believe to me, is a guy called Greg Nugent, genius of an individual. Greg and Natalia in our team, they developed a campaign called Fill the Seats. And the idea was to raise money to get Brazilian school children from favelas to go to the Paralympics. And we raised, I think, 300,000 in 2 weeks. 15,000 kids from favelas went to the games. We had Prince Harry supporting it, Coldplay supporting it. And then we started to build momentum. We got the money. And then we sold 2 million tickets in 3 weeks for the Paralympics.
Wow.
And it was amazing.
And from 150,000 before that?
Yeah. And I remember then on the opening day of the like when the opening ceremony was just so emotional because you never thought we'd actually get there. And I'll always remember the first day getting the car to the Olympic Park where my office was. And as we approached the Olympic Park, there were queues of people, like huge queues of people wanting to get into the park to see sport. And it was like,
what did you think when you saw that?
I cried. Like I am now getting really emotional. It was like, we're going to do it. Do you know what? We're going to do it because we couldn't fail. And to see that we could do it under the most difficult circumstances was just remarkable. And I think everyone sees London as the benchmark for the Paralympic Games. But Rio showed us something different. If we could still stage a spectacular Paralympic Games in Latin America that had never staged the Paralympics before during a massive financial crisis and still make it spectacular, then we can do this event anywhere in the world. And yeah, I mean, it was just stunning to see it come together.
You clearly, you really care
Yeah.
about what you do. You care about the International Paralympic Committee and it's emotional for you.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because like the Paralympic Games is the only major event in the world where disability is at the forefront. And if the Paralympics didn't exist, then I think the drive to stop discrimination of 1.2 billion people would be even further away than we are now. So that the Paralympics is this event that has to happen to put disability at the forefront of everyone's minds, because the sport performances, you can't change your attitude towards disability just because I tell you. But if you watch athletes perform on the world stage with billions of people watching, millions in the stadiums, that positive experience that you have helps change attitudes towards not just the athletes, but persons with disabilities in society, the 1.2 billion. And if that Games doesn't happen, you're thinking, it could be 8 years until there's another it'll be an 8-year gap from London, say, through to Tokyo. And you're thinking, this is going to really impact the inclusion agenda for persons with disabilities. So that's why it was so important to get the Games on. Because you've got all these athletes who have trained for 4 years, sacrificed so much, and you're thinking, we can't let them down, but also we can't let 1.2 billion people down.
I think it's so clear from your story that from, being a young man at school, and caring about the boy in your class who had a physical disability, to the people that you work with and caring about where they go in their career and not being selfish and saying, no, I want you to stay here, you're great. Going, no, go.
Yep.
To how you feel about the athletes and everybody involved. You've clearly got a deep empathy and care for people.
Totally.
And where does that come from?
My parents, family upbringing. Totally.
What did they teach you?
Well, to care for everyone. I mean, care, respect. Look, you learn so much from your parents, and I don't think you appreciate it until you're older. I mean, you were horrible when you were a teenager. I was a horrible teenager. I think especially my mum probably hated me when I was a teenager. But you don't realize at the time the way they're bringing you up and how much it'll benefit you in later life. And I think that's if I could change something now, it would be to be more appreciative for what they were doing when I was a kid. And it's only now that you realize, do you know what? It's amazing what they did.
Yeah. I think another lesson there, just from the Rio story, is that lesson of perseverance and having the right people around you that can give you that inspiration to keep pushing forward when everything seems so bleak.
Totally. I mean, I was getting messages from athletes going, are we on? Is this Games happening? I've trained for 4 years for this.
Wow.
And you're thinking, and you're like, yeah, we'll be fine. Don't worry. I mean, you've got to remember that at this time in Rio, not only did we have the financial crisis, so we were dealing with this financial crisis thinking, can we get the Games on? No. And then this report comes out exposing the doping practices of Russian athletes, the biggest doping scandal in world sport. And suddenly, again, we then have a decision to take at the IPC, which is, do we allow Russia to compete at Rio 2016? And we took a decision to not allow Russian athletes to compete at Rio 2016. And again, similar to when we had the 14th of February with Oscar Pistorius, the IPC banning Russian athletes from Rio 2016, it was the biggest news story on earth that day. And so again, you're thinking sometimes, do you know what? When I joined the IPC in 2010, when I left Leeds, I never thought I'd be like involved in such stories. Yeah, you're involved in a high-profile murder case, and then here you've got Russian doping, and so we had to deal with the decision we took on Russia. Was such a proud and brilliant decision by the board, because it was like, because we stood up for the morals of sport. I mean, and I think we coined this brilliant phrase that Russia had chosen medals over morals.
How does that make you feel being a part of an organisation?
Oh, amazing. Amazing. It was good, but also you were devastated at the same time, because I knew Russian athletes. And I remember after the press conference getting in the car and crying, because it was just such an emotional experience. And I just remember thinking, do you know what? There's some Russian athletes who, because of their government, are not going to be competing here at the Paralympic Games. And it's, although we knew it was the right decision, you couldn't help but feel an expression for those athletes. And then I flew back. Quite literally got on the plane, flew back that night, and I remember I was so tired, because by then I'd like gone 40 hours without any sleep, really.
Your job is exhausting.
And then I remember I was on business class flying back, and I must have just got on the plane. I fell asleep immediately before we took off.
No pixies?
No pixies this time. And 5 hours into the flight, I woke up and I'm still sat upright. So there you are on business class, where you could have had a bed, and I'm still sat up there. And the cabin crew were like,
"You're too used to
yeah." And but yeah, that was. I mean, so then we had those was two huge things in the build up to Rio. It was remarkable.
So 2018, a big transition happens in terms of your career. You go from director to chief brand and communications officer. What was that transition like?
The transition was really difficult. Throughout my career, every time I'd progressed, it had been fairly straightforward. And I didn't expect this to be so difficult as it was. So suddenly when you're the director of communications and you go to the chief, and the IPC had a very flat structure. There's chiefs, so the chief executive, and there was two other chiefs at the time. And then suddenly you're not just worried about your own team, but the entire organisation, its well-being, and you're looking so far ahead. And I found it really, really difficult. Really, really difficult, that transition, because I was learning completely new things. I'd gone from running a team to running the business.
That's good. How did you make that enjoyable, moving up and having so much more responsibility?
Again, probably goes back to, you always want to develop. The best development often comes when you're taken out of your comfort zone. And this was it. I was out of my comfort zone, and therefore I had to develop and go with it, really. And it was just, it was really difficult. First 6 months I was thinking, do I even ask if I want to go back to being a director rather than the chief?
Why?
Just because I thought, do you know what? Do I want this? Is this what I want to be? Do you know, is it going to be like this all the time, or am I going to get to grips with it?
What was different? What was the difference?
It's like first, you're looking at just so much thing. You've gone from looking at a team, and I developed. So at the team, I was so proud that I'd gone from 2 people in comms to 25.
Wow,
good growth.
And that's great growth. But then I treat them like my family, and suddenly then you're looking at the entire organisation, and you're looking at, can we do this? Can we do that?
It's about 150 people.
Yeah, and so suddenly that shift was just tricky, and having to deal with different issues and it was a real difficult transition, but one that I came out the other side of.
So for anybody watching who has either made that transition, they've gone from director to chief, or maybe they're about to or want to, can you, if you were to go back to yourself back at that time in your first 6 months of doing it, what advice would you give now?
I'd probably, I mean, I don't read many books, and this is probably my biggest regret. Is like there's some, like our chief executive Mike, he reads all these business books, and he's always saying, "Oh, I've read this, I read that," and I don't. And I think maybe I should. And I would have preferred to have read those books maybe beforehand and gone, like look at the business and cultures and things like that. And yeah, I just think, and I think actually I should have gone in probably less confident. I was like, this will be fine. It'll just be like, all it is a change of job title. And actually, no, it was a change of responsibilities. And yeah, I probably had maybe over-egged it a bit. Be less confident next time.
I think what you do is you what you may not have in reading books, you've got the heart. And it is a mix of head and heart, in what you do.
I always say it like, I always say I don't read the books because you will always find the best model for you through just experience. Because I often think that like just because someone's wrote a book and said this is the best approach to managing people, that might maybe work for that organization, and actually you should find your own way to really inspire and build the team. And this probably goes back to my rugby days. Is that's where I got the probably my first experience of leadership was playing rugby as a kid, and the coaches teaching you to look at teamwork and leadership and how can you build a team spirit. And we weren't very good when I played rugby, but you learn more from your bad experiences and losing than you do your good experiences and winning, is my view.
Do you feel like now you've been through so many situations within the Paralympics, you're quite equipped now for many eventualities?
Yeah, I dare so. I dare say so, but then everything surprises you. I mean, we came out of that, and then we're preparing for Tokyo, and you're thinking, do you know what? Tokyo's got the potential to be the greatest Paralympic Games ever. And then February 2020, COVID comes along, and you're thinking, oh my word. And then it was pretty clear that the Paralympics wouldn't be able to happen. And then suddenly you're postponing the Paralympics, and there's speculation they're going to get cancelled. If the Paralympics don't happen, there's a good chance that'll leave the IPC with a serious financial issue.
Yeah.
So suddenly you're responsible for 130 jobs. You've also got to keep your team motivated to try replan a Paralympic Games at a time when they can't leave their homes. So like everyone else, the pandemic, you couldn't leave home, you're working from home. So you're trying to replan the world's third biggest sport event from either your spare bedroom or your kitchen table. And you're trying to keep that workforce motivated on delivering the Games in Tokyo. So and whilst you're struggling yourself with your own mental health, that's why I think there'll always be learning experiences. I'm equipped probably with dealing with crisis, but we get crisis after crisis after crisis, and you've just got to think, it's unbelievable.
How was your mental health during that period?
It was hideous. It was really, really difficult. Really, really difficult.
What makes you say that?
Why? Just like when you're the chief, no one asks how you are. The higher you go up, the less people care for you in the organization. You care for them. And I was always really keen to check how the team were, check how their mental health were, trying to keep them motivated. I mean, I knew what was going on so much behind the scenes. I couldn't tell them. And you've got to try keep a positive picture going, because if the team lose their motivation, you're in real trouble. So keeping spirits high of the team, keeping them focused on the goal of delivering Tokyo was so important. And you're asking how they are, but no one comes to you and went, how are you? Because you were dealing with so much pressure. Because I'm thinking, if we don't get these games on, the athletes are going to suffer who've been training. The game's not, again, similar to Rio. If the games don't happen, what does that do for disability rights in the world? 1.2 billion people need these games to happen. And you've got jobs on the line. It was really, really difficult. So dealing with that, you couldn't get home, couldn't see family members. It was really difficult. And then obviously it was such an evolving picture. I mean, I remember, I think in 2020, getting home for Christmas, and it was like, thank God we've got to Christmas, and to spend some time with my family who I'd not really seen. And then in 2020, I think I got home, and then within 24 hours, there was a new variant. And then it was on the news saying the Dutch are closing the border. And then I was like, I remember saying to my parents, I'm sorry, but I think I'm going to have to go home here, because if I don't know when I'm going to get back to Germany, because it looks like they're shutting the borders down. So yeah, there was no Christmas at home. I flew back to Germany.
You spend it on your own?
Yeah, really difficult. It was really, really hard.
That's tough. When you're, with your family, you don't probably get to see them much, especially in all that time.
Yeah.
And
Well, because Christmas was the one thing you were looking forward to. Like, I could see family, I could see friends, and then sat on your own having Christmas dinner.
And you're making a bit of sacrifice for all the athletes, all the people
yeah.
involved.
Sacrifice for everyone else.
To keep the ship going.
I always try to see the positive in every negative. Because I was in Germany and we had 2 weeks off, I stopped. Like, I just rested. I slept so much and recharged the batteries, because you knew once the year began in 2021, you had the most monumental task of your career, which was delivering the first Paralympic Games during a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so it was recharge. I mean, it's a horrendous experience. I remember eating my Christmas dinner on Skype to my mum and dad. Everyone was super emotional. But yeah, I mean, it was difficult. But I wasn't the only one from the IPC team who was alone at Christmas. And at the time, the German rules was you couldn't mix households.
Oh.
So there was all of us. Like, I remember New Year's Eve, we had a virtual party, playing Cards Against Humanity all at home, drinking a bottle of wine on your own, but we were all in different houses, and that's how we had to do it. But it was really, really difficult.
How were your parents not having you for Christmas?
Sorry?
How were your parents?
Oh, it was. I think it was probably worse for them. Do you know what I mean? 'Cause, Christmas is a time for family, and suddenly they've got a son who's not there.
Tough.
Yeah.
Very tough. Man, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
You've been
Exhausted,
through a
innit?
lot.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you have a positive attitude towards everything.
You've got to know, I mean, that comes from the athletes. Totally. I mean, the athletes are the most amazing people to meet. I mean, you have athletes who have either been born with a disability, acquired a disability, and they're massively positive. They don't focus on what's not working on their bodies. They maximize what does. And you're thinking, well, that positivity can be a lesson to us all. So no matter what situation you're in, you've got to always try look at, well, this is shit, but what's the positive thing that you can pull out of it? And that comes from I've learned so much from that, from speaking to athletes and such like. So yeah.
What's the lesson? To find the positives in your situation, definitely.
Totally.
For everyone, as you say, these athletes, they don't focus on what's not working or not there. They focus on what they do have and maximizing that. I think that's a really powerful statement to hold within us all.
Definitely. If things are tough, just keep going.
Totally. And also, like,
find
the support network was really good. So, like, our president, Andrew, is a good friend of mine. Our chief executive, Mike, we all work together. I mean, like, I have to say, and this is where diversity again is a strength. Is like, Andrew's Brazilian, Mike's American, two-time Paralympian, our chief executive. We've got Liz, who's our legal counsel for Britain. We've got Colleen, who's our chief of games. We're all very different, and we all bring something very different to the table. And when you bring diverse skills to the table and different, like, I'm a very different personality to our other chiefs in the organization. But if you recruit people who are all like you, then your organization is never going to thrive. And actually, if you bring people who have got different personality types, different skill sets, your team will be so much better because people will think differently. If you bring people together who think like you, your organization is not going to develop. But if you bring people who will think differently and challenge, then you make progress. Much more progress.
So you think, I mean, that's a lot to go through. That's a lot, but it doesn't stop there. 2022.
Yep.
You've got to organise a Winter Paralympics
In Beijing.
And what's going on in the world?
Well, obviously, in the build-up to Beijing, I mean, again, second games to be delivered during a pandemic, so that's a challenge for us. And then at the start of the year, there's murmurings about Russia potentially invading Ukraine. And you're thinking, oh, not again. Because in 2014, Russia invaded the Crimea during the Paralympic Winter Games. There's a thing called an Olympic Truce. We're hoping that, and that covers both the Olympics and Paralympic Games, and it calls for peace. The Olympic Truce calls for peace in the world during the Olympic and Paralympic Games, from I think it's a week before the Olympics to a week after the Paralympics. Mm-hmm. So you're hoping that the Russian government will abide by the truce, and they don't. So on the day we're flying to Beijing, Russian forces move into the Ukraine. And this is happening just as I'm getting on the plane to go to Singapore and then on to Beijing.
What are you thinking at this time?
Oh no, Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day. So our president was flying from Brazil, and then we just had to deal. Luckily, thank God, today planes have Wi-Fi, and we're trying to deal with this situation. So basically, sometimes the flight to a games is your last period of rest. Switch off the phone, relax. And it was just intense work all the way there, trying to get statements ready on what we're going to do. And then, again, you're back in the world spotlight. So the world is looking for you to take a decision. And then it was a really difficult scenario because obviously China and Russia are huge allies. You're hosting a game in China, so there's a lot of pressure from all sides, like governments from around the world, Chinese government, and it's just supremely stressful. I think, in the week leading up to the opening ceremony, I was averaging like 45 minutes sleep a night.
Whoa.
It was hideous. It was no pixies, thankfully. But it was really, really difficult.
So you're just under so much pressure. And this is the story of Craig Spence. It's so how are you supported in this, and how do you cope with it, and what are your strategies? And
one thing I do, is a coping strategy. I exercise. I love to cycle. I love to cycle. So when I'm stressed, I'll go cycle.
Road, mountain bike?
Well, it's a road bike. Bonn is a beautiful place for cycling. Yeah. So I remember in the build up to the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games, I wasn't sleeping particularly well, and at 5 o'clock every morning I'd go to a 3-hour cycle before work, and that would clear my head. And cycling and when you cycle, I found it just not only would it clear my head mentally, but it gave you some thinking time. So I remember one day, and I pretty much wrote the opening ceremony speech in my head while cycling, and then I had it, and then I just basically got my phone and dictated it into the phone and was like, this is, and then it just tweaked it when I got home. And then one thing I have to say, this is one thing I learned, and I've passed this on to a number of colleagues, is despite the pressure and the stress, and I said I'm here now, I only slept for 45 minutes that night, but that's not because I can't sleep. I sleep really well. So if I got to bed, I'm asleep within seconds. And one of the strategies I can't remember who told me to do this, but it's one of the greatest things they ever told me, was like, in my early days when I started work, I'd sometimes go to bed and I couldn't sleep because I had so many things going through my head of what I needed to do the next day. And Sunday nights are the worst because you're thinking Monday morning, blah, blah, blah. And this person said, take a pen and a notepad and put it at your side of your bed. And when you're lying in bed and you've got all these things putting through your head, write them down. And that clears it from your head onto the paper. And then when you wake up in the morning, you've just got to read the piece of paper rather than trying to remember things. Yeah. Now today, I don't have a piece of paper and a pen next to my bed. I have just the phone, and I can dictate into the phone. But that's one of the best ways to clear your head so that you can get the good night's sleep. My problem now is I'll fall asleep immediately, but I'll wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning and instantly get a thought of like, this is where we need to do. So, and obviously, previously when we worked with Tokyo and Beijing, we were having conference calls from 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning. Whereas now with Paris and Milan, we're on a equal time zone. So
that's nice. Easier.
Thank the Lord.
Yes. Great advice there of how to just, take it out of the mind onto paper. Then you can forget about it. It's like trying to run, loads of programs or tabs on the computer. Yeah. It takes up bandwidth that you've got a limited amount of. And also I find really helpful on Sunday, if you write out your plan for the week on a Sunday, what you're doing, what day, what time, what the outcomes are, you can go and sleep pretty well on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Knowing that, okay, just going to have to get up and do my plan.
Totally.
And you're good.
Yeah.
So what's next for Craig?
Yes, what is next?
What next? Well, we're working now on the biggest campaign of my life, I dare say. Around Tokyo 2020, the International Paralympic Committee, in partnership with the International Disability Alliance, we launched We the 15. And We the 15 is aims to be the world's biggest human rights movement, representing the world's 1.2 billion persons with disabilities.
Wow.
It's a decade-long campaign.
Wow.
And it's become a pet project, I dare say. It's like a personal passion. And we've brought together a coalition of 20 international organizations spanning sport, business, human rights, policy, advocacy. Because one thing that surprised me when I joined the IPC is all the disability organizations work in silos. They all want their piece of the pie. And I'm like, hang on a minute, wouldn't it be better if we all work together? So the IPC, together with the International Disability Alliance, we pulled everyone together and said, look, let's work together on creating a movement that campaigns for change. So we launched We the 15 around the Tokyo Paralympic Games last year. Why did we do that? Well, we knew that the Paralympics is the world's #1 sport event for engaging people in disability conversations. So it was a stunning launch. And we've really brought people together. So not only have we brought a coalition of 20 international organizations together, we've brought some of the greatest minds in marketing and communications together. So we've got Adam and Eve, who are based in London, an amazing agency, supremely creative. They've been working with the IPC for nearly 3 years now on a pro bono basis.
Pro bono.
So they give up their time to help us create so much. So they came up with a new narrative for the IPC, which is change starts with sport. An amazing narrative about how the work of the Paralympic movement, not only do we change lives of athletes and people, but we change cities through infrastructure improvements and things like that. So change starts with sport is a lovely brand narrative. And they worked with us to develop We the 15. And then we also brought in a few other Omnicom agencies. Fleischmann Hillard joined us as our PR arm, Porter Novelli from a digital point of view, and then Portland from a political point of view. So we brought all these agencies together pro bono. We sold them the vision. Look, we want to launch the world's biggest human rights movement for persons with disabilities. Are you in? And they were all like, yeah. And we sold it by saying, look, the world's doing so much on inclusion, but disability is being forgotten about. And now, especially with the pandemic that's disproportionately impacted persons with disabilities, now is the time to put inclusion at the heart, disability at the heart of the inclusion agenda. And that's what we've managed to do.
Why do you think agencies like Adam and Eve would say, okay, we're not gonna ask for money for this. We're just gonna be part of this and be part of this vision.
I think they realise, look, this is why do we do what we do at the IPC? We want to make this planet better for everyone. And they see that as they buy into that vision. And I also think they see it as a real opportunity as we look to develop society as well. I mean, and Adam and Eve are leading the way when it comes to disability. Like, we want to change culture. Sport alone is not going to change the lives of 1.2 billion people. We need to do a cultural shift. So Adam and Eve is leading the way now with adverts where the lead characters are persons with disabilities. So Virgin Media had a wheelchair user as part of a love story. Lotto had a wheelchair user as part of their story. They weren't, the disability wasn't the focal point. They just happened to have a disability, in the same way that I'm wearing brown shoes. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of those things. So it's just amazing to see an agency so passionate about what we're trying to do. Same with Fleischmann Hillard and Porter Novelli. They're saying, look, we understand now that the inclusion agenda isn't just about ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. It's also disability, and we share your passion for changing the world.
So you've got a reason why behind what you do, which I think really is something that can help in so many situations when you haven't slept for 36 hours and you've got to speak to the press, or you've got to make a difficult decision about your career to leave friends, or you've got to leave the country and leave family and friends. There's a reason why kind of behind you. I don't think maybe you necessarily knew that before joining the Paralympics, what that was, but maybe you did. But you care about people, and now you're part of something that really can have a massive impact on, as you said, not just even 1.5 billion people who have disabilities, but everybody else and their perception of other humans. And to be part of that is, I think, is an amazing, vessel to for your care about humanity and people. And you're doing amazing things. So thank you for all the work you do.
You're welcome. Yeah, I guess that's the joy of the IPC. So many people want to work in sport, but we are sport with a purpose, and it's that purpose that I think motivates me every single day. And like we always joke in the office, why do we do it? Well, we want to change the world, and there's no better purpose to get you out of bed every morning, motivated that knowing that what you do each day at work is making the world better. And the moment that isn't the case is the moment we should step away.
Yeah. Some of the summaries I get from your story, one is of leadership and knowing how to nurture talent and the importance of it, whether they go up in your organization or whether they go somewhere else. I think that's something that can cause a long-lasting effect to other people that you can still check in with and see their growth and development. I also think every time you're able to deal with a bigger challenge, it could be adversity, it could be something really difficult, you grow and you're able to weather more and more storms from that point. I think that's definitely another one. And also that the element that I've got from your story is that it takes a real passion to put others before yourself within your job, within your role, within your life. And that's something that you've really exemplified through your story, through your sacrifices to, as you say, change the world.
The passion now is stronger than it's ever been, I dare say. And it's my job to get that passion into others, because only by us all being committed, and we've got the most passionate team. We have across the whole IPC workforce and across the whole Paralympic movement. When I look at our member organisations, many of them are volunteers, but we've all got this passion that is through what we do. We use sport as a tool to change the world. And there could be no better thing to get out of bed for each morning than that.
And for anybody watching who'd love to get involved in any way, I'm sure there's lots of ways to get involved. How to be part of this movement? How can they do that?
There's so many ways. It depends what you want to do. It's like we have volunteers who are classifiers at events. We have volunteers at major events. In comms, we have writers around the world who write about Paralympic sport.
If you want to be a volunteer, how do you do that?
Well, if for example, the Games in Paris will recruit probably 25,000 volunteers for the Paralympics. They'll have a whole recruitment campaign coming out probably next year. You can easily apply. You can work with the national associations in your country or the domestic sport federations, offer support, offer to write about them, get to know our athletes, get involved. And then we've always got jobs going at the IPC. We're like any other organisation where we expand, so new roles come, but we also have people who leave the team for whatever reason. So we've always got opportunities to come and join the IPC, which is this magical organisation.
Sounds magical. Sounds stressful at times, but as we said, there's a mission and a purpose behind it, which is meaningful and impactful.
Absolutely. 100%.
Thank you very much for joining us. And
you're welcome.
Sharing the story of how you became Craig Spence.
Let's hope I can continue being Craig Spence.
Thank you.